Now let's go over some basics about classroom management, things that you might find to be very useful in your classroom. And again, I want to remind you, these are not intended to be for you to implement all of them everywhere with all ADHD children. I intend this to be, again, like a menu at a restaurant, where you're going to go down the list and pick what you think is most suitable for that particular child and the problem that you're trying to help them with. Excuse me. Some of the basic considerations that we teach here in the West, in the US in particular, are things like this. Have at least one teacher in each elementary school or high school who has received a lot of extra training in ADHD and its management in school, and assign them as the ADHD liaison. This is the person that when teachers in that school are having some problems with an ADHD child, they can call on that teacher to stop by and give them some advice on what they might try to help that child. We don't need to get some formal meeting or engage in what we call formal special educational evaluations here in the US for those kinds of simple problems. We need an expert teacher in each school, familiar with all of these methods, who can meet with other teachers and give them advice on what they might think about doing to help that child. So having a master teacher with expertise in ADHD can be a liaison, that is, a supervisor to the other teachers, a consultant, if you will, to them. This person can also serve in the same role with parents. If parents have concerns about their child at school, they don't call all of the child's teachers. That's very disruptive to those teachers' daily routines. Instead, the parent calls the liaison. And it's the job of that liaison, that master teacher, to go and meet with the teachers and find out whether there are problems and what they might be. And then to suggest to the teachers and to the parents what might be done to facilitate improving that problem. So just as hospitals here in the US have patient representatives, that if patients don't like the care they're getting at the hospital, they can call their representative, who is then going to meet with the rest of the hospital staff and the doctors, and is going to then get back to the patient about what's wrong, what we need to do to fix it, and so on. And that way, the patient doesn't have to search it out for themselves and try to contact all these people when they're not happy with the care that they're getting. We have found here in the US that schools that institute the ADHD liaison with a master teacher find that parents and teachers are much more satisfied, and children with ADHD are much more successful in those schools than in schools that chose not to do this sort of liaison. Another thing we've learned about ADHD children is you should never hold them back to repeat a grade, what we call grade retention. If the child did not do well this year, repeating a failed year is not a way of helping them. And yet some people think that, well, if they didn't get it this time, we'll just have to do it again and see if they get it next year. We know from many studies that retaining children, holding them back a grade in school to repeat that grade, is harmful to children, not helpful. It results in a variety of psychological and educational problems for those children, and increases the likelihood that they will drop out of school before finishing their compulsory education. So please don't recommend repeating a grade or holding a child back in school as a treatment strategy. After all, it failed once. Why would you repeat a failure again? It makes no sense. We do encourage teachers here in the US to spend the first week or two of the school year, here that school year usually begins in September, to use the first week or two to focus on the rules of their classroom and rewarding children for following those rules, so that the teacher emphasizes how children should behave, what we expect them to do in each of the classes, what good behavior is supposed to be like, and even put lists in front of the children on posters or signs around the classroom that show what good behavior is supposed to be. What are the rules for reading, for science, for math, for free play, for physical education? Each of them has different rules and expectations. Post them, list them, put signs and reminders, and then spend the first week or so of school rewarding children for following those rules. And don't spend so much time on the lesson plan, on the content of the lesson. We'll get to that. But you can't teach the content if the children aren't under control. So we have to establish behavioral control first to make them available for learning. And once they're available and following our rules and instructions, we can then go over the lessons and the content and teach much more effectively. Now, I also want you to think about the way you arrange the desks in your classroom. We have found that putting lots of children around large tables, like circular or rectangular tables, and having them all work together there is a disaster for ADHD children. It invites a lot of socializing and eye contact and other distractions that they can't handle very well. ADHD children do better when they have their own individual desk and workspace, where all the desks are in rows, like traditional classrooms used to be, facing the teaching area where the teacher is. Those are much better arrangements than our group tasks done at tables where children do kind of a group learning. We also want the ADHD child to be seated as close as possible to where you as a teacher spend most of your time, so that they're right next to the teaching area and we can provide consequences for that child without being very disruptive of the teaching that we're doing. So that way we can make eye contact, touch the child on the shoulder, whisper an instruction or approval or praise in their ear while we're talking to the other class, and otherwise provide these immediate consequences to them, this more immediate accountability. You can't do that if the ADHD child is seated at the back of the classroom, which is where many teachers put them so they aren't so disruptive to the other students. Well, that may be good for the other students, but it does not help the ADHD child to behave better and to perform more effectively in school. So get the child up where you teach so you can interact, supervise, and provide consequences for their behavior very quickly and frequently, and then you'll get better control over them. Now, think about the kinds of work you ask children to do at their desk. Are there things we've learned about how to structure that work that help ADHD children do better? Of course there are. And one of the things that we've learned over decades of research on educating ADHD children is that their biggest problem is with productivity, the amount of work done. It is not so much with accuracy, how correct they were. They're only about 5 to 10% less accurate than other children. The biggest difference is how much work they do. They do very little work as a result of their behavior problems, their distractibility, their motivational difficulties. So it's the number of problems that they attempt to do where we see the biggest difference with other children. It's production, not accuracy. So what does that tell us? If we want to help ADHD children, during the first week or two of school, when we start giving them desk work to do, don't worry about grading their paper. Worry or focus instead on rewarding them for every problem they attempt. To encourage productivity, get them working, get them doing as much work as they can. And then when their productivity is similar to that of other children in your classroom, then we can worry about grading the paper and where they made the mistakes and instructing them on the correct approach to that. But separate correctness or accuracy from productivity and reward the productivity first. If you do it the other way around, where you in fact correct the paper, because some of the work they do is wrong, it's a form of punishment when you point this out to them. You're actually discouraging productivity when you grade children's papers and point out what they did wrong. So, focus on production first. Don't worry about papers and grading them. and encourage how many problems they attempt to do. I've already told you to decrease the workload. Don't give them 20 or 30 problems in math to do at one sitting. Instead, break that down into smaller quotas of work, as I said earlier, where they do a small amount of work, have a few minutes break, bring the work up to you, and then go back to their desk and try another 5 problems or so. And by doing 5 problems, take a break, move around, 5 problems, take a break, by repeating that cycle, they are much more likely to get all 30 problems done than if you simply handed them a worksheet with lots of problems on it and said, do these at your desk. They won't. It's overwhelming. It's discouraging. They know they can't sustain their behavior toward that. You've given them an impossible task. So give them a possible task, something they can succeed at. You can even do that by asking them to choose the initial quota. Here, how much work do you think you can get done on this page? How many problems would you like to try first? Okay, you want to do 3? Go do 3 for me. Bring it back. Take a break. Okay, and then we'll have you do some more. And often children are more likely to do work that they have chosen, that is the amount of problems that they've specified, than they are to do what you tell them to do. So make sure that you ask the child, how much of these would you like to try first? You can always increase the quota if it's a little too small. If they say 2 problems, then the next time we'll have them do 4 or 6. But the point is this, break it into small chunks that are easily done successfully with little effort, and after which they can move around and get approval from you and then get more work to be done. They are much more likely to do that kind of pacing of a task than they are to do a full assignment given all at once that is overwhelming to them. We've also learned in the classrooms I designed that if you can involve them actively in the teaching, if you can allow movement and them to be a part of the lesson, they're more likely to learn from and attend to that lesson than if you simply required that they sit passively at their desk like a dead person, a cadaver, who has their hands in their lap, their head facing forward, they're not moving, they can't talk. That's what dead people do. Is that what we want, our classrooms full of dead people? I don't think so. We want actively engaged learners in our classroom. So instead of requiring them to be passive, invite the ADHD child up next to you. Let them hold the pointer while you go over a poem on the blackboard, or let them hold the book while you read the poem or the story out of the book. Let them be the secretary and record the problem on the blackboard while you're setting up the problem. In other words, give them something to do as part of the lesson. And then they're more likely to be attentive to the lesson. They can't help but be. They're part of the lesson, as opposed to being passive learners. So remember, we don't want classes of dead people. We want classes of children engaged in learning with active behaviors that are part of that learning process. Now, if they must do work at their desk quietly with other children, let them move a little bit. Let them stand, sit on their legs, kneel down, sit on a rubber ball that occupational therapists use that has sand in it. We call them balance balls. Make that their chair so that they can wiggle around a little bit. One of the schools near here for ADHD children has all of their desks with little swings that you put your feet on under the desk instead of a solid bar. And the ADHD child can simply put their foot on there and swing their feet back and forth while they're listening to their teacher. We know that very simple repetitive movements encourage ADHD children to be better attentive to what is going on around them. It can even be tapping their foot to a metronome or squeezing a tennis ball in their left or right hand while they listen to you and take notes. Any movement is beneficial, but sitting still is not. So allow some movement while they have work to do. And then make sure they get frequent exercise breaks throughout your class to help them sustain their attention. Periodically have the class stand up, move, stretch, do jumping jacks or other calisthenics, maybe march around the classroom to a song and then come back and sit down and work again. Movement facilitates the resurgence of our attention. It increases our resources in our mind to concentrate and to work harder. And the longer we have to sit still, the more we deplete our executive pool or resources. And therefore, the more we need to interrupt what we're doing with exercise breaks. And by the way, that should tell you something. You never keep an ADHD child in from recess or physical education as a form of punishment, because the person you're punishing is you, not them. You're only going to make their ADHD worse by not allowing them to go out and move and play and learn and do sports. So if you need to punish an ADHD child, you do it by taking rewards away or by doing time out within your classroom. But you don't do it by depriving them of physical activity, recess, or physical education. Now, many people have come to believe that the more homework we give to children, the better they learn. This is simply not true. Many, many studies have examined this, and there is almost no correlation between the amount of homework assigned to elementary school students and how well they learn and do in their classes. You can see here that the correlation is only about 0.15 to 0.25. That is trivial, right? So the idea that the more homework the better is false. Indeed, we encourage schools, elementary schools that is, not to give any homework at all. It doesn't really matter, right? You're not improving the child's education by doing so. And in fact, you're only punishing the parents because they're the ones who have to now try to get that homework done with that ADHD child who is probably coming off of their medication at the end of the school day and is going to be even harder to manage than he was with you in your classroom. When we get to middle school or high school, then some research shows that a little bit of homework is beneficial. About 1.5 to 2 hours of homework total at night across all classes is the optimal amount. More than that, it is not helping. But below that, it might be harmful. That is, it might reduce learning. So older students, homework might help, but make sure it's limited. We don't want them spending their entire lives outside of school studying. But for younger children, particularly elementary school, homework isn't necessary. So limit the homework assignments, if you would please, because they're not really making much difference for the children in your school. And that's not just true of ADHD children, it's true of all children. Now, if a child is working in school and you give them an assignment and they don't finish it, right? Some teachers in our country like to send that unfinished classwork home in addition to the homework that the parents now have to get done. In other words, it's again a form of punishment for the child, but more likely for the parents who now have to supervise that extra work beyond the homework that they were given to do. We tell parents not to accept this work. It's not their job. It's the teacher's job to get classwork done. And if the classwork isn't getting done, then the point of performance is in that classroom at that desk with that child. And that's where we need to make changes in order to try to get more work done there and not just pass it on to the parents to do at home to make up for it. Because what you're doing is abandoning your responsibility for this child's education when you send that work home. It's no different than if the parents sent their dirty laundry to school on Monday and insisted that you do it for them because they couldn't get to it over the weekend with such a disruptive child. Do you see how silly that is? You have responsibilities, parents have responsibilities, and we don't palm off our responsibilities onto other people to have them do it. That's not right. So we want you to take responsibility for the schoolwork. And if the child isn't completing the schoolwork, we need to change the classroom in such a way to improve that performance and leave the parents out of it. They're not the solution to that problem. Now, it does help parents, if you choose to give some homework, that they know what the homework's going to be for the entire week. You can put it up on your website if your school has one, where teachers post homework for the week so that parents can go to that website and see what needs to be done on what evenings and plan their week accordingly. But please don't surprise them on a Tuesday or Wednesday night with a special project when they have other commitments, or maybe that child has other things they're supposed to be doing with their sports team or with a club or maybe with some kind of athletic activity or Cub Scouts or maybe some religious activity that they're supposed to be involved in. So please work with the parents on keeping them alert to what the homework is for that week, and then they can plan around what that homework is to do, and it's more likely to get done. Now, both parents and teachers ask us if ADHD children, when they have desk work or homework to do they learn better with music playing than in a quiet room? In other words, some children like to listen to music through headphones or earbuds while they're doing their work. People think that this is distracting, that if an ADHD child is distractible, this must be harmful to getting their work done. But research shows that that's not true, that children can play their favorite music, and it actually helps them to pay attention because now they have to increase their alertness and their powers of concentration in order to sort of tune out the background music and stimulation. And by the way, let them choose the style of music they like. Don't just give them classical music because you happen to like classical music. It needs to be something that they find enjoyable, but that can be played at a soft volume, and then you will find that they're going to get more work done, not less work done. So please allow them to study with a little background stimulation, music, if that helps. Other things that you can do while you're teaching is to move around more, be more animated, be theatrical like an actor, show some enthusiasm for the lesson that you're trying to teach. Because we know that people, including us, are more likely to pay attention to those sorts of things. Like when we go see a play or a drama, we don't want people looking at us with a deadpan expression and speaking in a monotone. We wouldn't go back and see that play or recommend it to others. So we want teachers to be theatrical in a way, to be good teachers. So move, touch, talk. Put enthusiasm, raise and lower the tone of your voice, use gesture while you're teaching, and people will pay more attention to you. Your students will in this case. And then we want you to move around the classroom and be what we call a 1-minute manager. And as you move and as you teach, you can whisper little bits of praise and reminders and approval to the children, or maybe an occasional reprimand. But you're going to make it personal to them by touching them and talking in their ear and giving them the feedback that you want to give them while you move through your classroom and your teaching. So personalize whatever it is you want to say to an ADHD child or another student. This works for typical students too. And then go to them, touch them briefly, say what you want to say, make sure they have eye contact. If you want, you can have them repeat it back to you if it's an instruction, and then move on to other children. But circulate in your classroom as you teach, giving feedback to the students for how they're doing. We talked about self-monitoring and the turtle technique or other ways of nonverbal cueing. I don't need to repeat that. I do want teachers, when they think about how they teach, not to reward impulsiveness. Inhibition is a big problem for ADHD children, and if you turn your class into a game show, like some educators do here in the US, where they ask a question and then they point to the child who gets their hand up first, you're reinforcing impulse problems. You're making children become disinhibited to respond impulsively in order to get that answer to that question. And we don't want to do that, especially with ADHD children. So what you can do is to give every ADHD child or every child in your classroom a little chalkboard or maybe a laminated piece of paper of cardstock that's solid and everybody has a grease pencil. And then when you ask a question, every child writes down the answer and then holds up their little whiteboard. And when all hands are in the air, then you call on one student to come forward or to simply explain, how did you get that answer? Tell the class how you did that. And then we can see who's getting it right and who's getting it wrong, and we can go and work with the student that got it wrong so that they can understand better the mistake they made, and the right way to solve it. But this way, you're assessing all children in the classroom all the time for what they're learning, as opposed to simply calling on the best students to impulsively answer off the top of their head. That is not good teaching. We don't need game shows to teach. The ADHD child has more difficulties with their academic subjects in the afternoon than the morning. Now, I'm talking about children who are not taking ADHD medication, which does help to correct for this problem somewhat. But instead, we want you to focus on putting some more difficult subjects in the morning, and then leaving some of the nicer subjects, the easier subjects like physical education or like art or music, and scattering those more into the afternoon. Or if you can't do that, at least alternate a hard subject with an easy subject as you go across the day, so that the ADHD child gets a break from doing all of the hard academic work all back to back. But remember, their attention span is declining with the day. So make sure that you don't put the most difficult subjects in the afternoon, because you're going to have greater difficulty. And as I've said, try to alternate challenging with easy subject matter, and sedentary work with movement work or music, so that they can do fun things alternating with difficult things. Now, other things to help in your classroom is when children have to listen to you teach briefly a particular lesson or concept. All students should have a pencil in their hand while you're teaching, and all students